Hello, happy World Food Day. I am Alexis Badenmare, and behind the scenes we have Corey Melby. We both work for Organic Consumers Association. OCA is the a North American affiliate of Regeneration International, and we had the most exciting opportunity this year for the People's Food Summit. We are doing this broadcast with the Real Organic Project. So they had an amazing event at Churchdown Dairy in New York on Saturday. And Rose Welch, our director, and Liz Welch, who does our newsletter, Organic Bites, they were both there in person, but we recorded it for you all. And we are going to be playing segments from the Real Organic Project conference for you today as our North American World Food Day broadcast for the People's Summit. So our first speaker is Lindley Dixon. She is the co-founder of the Real Organic Project. And you're going to get well acquainted with what they've been up to at Real Organic Project through these videos. But I just want to give some thanks for their long-standing campaign. You may be aware that a few years ago, it was clear that the USDA was not enforcing organic standards in a range of areas, but one that was especially important was food grown in soil, right? I mean, that's what organic means. Organic means adding organic matter to the soil. That's what makes regenerative organic. It makes it more drought resistant. It makes it more able to infiltrate water and make water available to crops. That's because of soil organic matter. And of course, that's why organic farming is good for the climate. So if you don't have soil, you don't really have organic farming. So it was a massive crisis in organic. And a great project was started. It became the Real Organic Project. But first, it was Save the Soil. It was a great campaign to save the soil. Keep the Soil in Organic was the name of the campaign. And unfortunately, that campaign lost. And the USDA decided that it was perfectly fine to have soilless growing systems certified USDA organic. So if you go to the store today, if you buy berries like Driscoll berries, those berries were not, even if they're organic, they were not grown in soil. They were grown in pots, in hydroponic systems. And with all, I do not know how they get so-called organic inputs in these systems. It doesn't make any sense to me. They have to replace all of nature to grow things without soil. But that's actually what's happening. And it started in berries, but it's going into other vegetables and greens. And really, to know that you are actually getting produce that is grown in soil, you have to look for Real Organic Project certified produce. And so that's what this conference is about. And I'm so proud to bring it to you today. The first speaker, as I said, is Lindley Dixon. And so I will allow Corey, take it away, put on Lindley's speech. Thanks so much.
So thank you, everybody, for coming. This is my farm. I'm Lindley Dixon from Southwest Colorado, the co-director of the Real Organic Project. And I don't need to spend a lot of time probably explaining to you why I'm so proud of this picture, because I feel like I'm speaking to the choir. I think most people notice that there's very little bare dirt on this farm, and it's May. You can see because there's frost cover over all the crops. And if you fly over the country or drive through the country in April or May or any time in the winter, what you're mostly seeing is bare dirt. And there might be some extra crop residue on the surface now because no-till is a big thing. And so everybody's spraying herbicides across the field in the fall and leaving that residue on the top. And that's now climate-smart farming, according to the USDA. But there's more herbicide use under this no-till farming. And there's more fertilizer runoff because the cracks in the soil where the surface applied fertilizers just run right through straight to the drainage tiles and out into the waterways. So our climate smart farming, according to the USDA, is even worse than what they had before. And the main point that I want you to understand today, after hearing all these farmers talk, is that farmers really know what is good for the land. And we should be the ones that are defining the standards, defining what organic is. And before the USDA ever had control of the word organic, we were the ones that wrote that law. Even before that, we had our regional chapters and we formed all these certification groups and we were writing the standards. And so our whole project is an attempt to get back to that farmer-led aspect of the organic movement. And so what you see here, I could spend 20 minutes just on this one slide, but we're actually growing the fertility for our crop in the aisles where I walk and where the tractor runs. And so we don't mow it all at once because this is a great harbor for all the beneficial insects that are our biological control of any pests that might show up. So we mow those aisles as we need to, and we put all those clippings from the diverse pastures right into where we're going to grow crops. And that slow release of the breakdown of the organic matter from those aisles is what creates the fertility, slow release fertility for the next crop. And I till that matter under in the first couple inches of the soil. And so that is climate smart farming. And if you go to Washington, D.C. right now, every single representative has been trained by the chemical lobby to say that chemical no-till is climate smart. Organic farmers will never be climate smart. They said this to my face, because you till. So they just don't know what organic farming is anymore. And that's what the Real Organic Project is trying to help spread the word. Education is so much a part of what we do. So it's not just a label. We're trying to kind of reawaken the farmers and the organic movement and say we are all responsible for what the word organic is, and we can't leave it to the USDA to define anymore. Helen Keyes is a real idol of mine. She's a board president of the Cornucopia Institute, where I started. And she has a wonderful video that you can find on our newly launched website tomorrow that talks about what's happened to dairy in this country. Organic dairy used to be this haven from the conventional dairy where there was so much consolidation. And all of a sudden, family farmers were making a living because organic dairy really has scale limitations. There's only so far you can move a cow from the milking barn out to find something to eat and get it back to milk again, and you have to move further and further away from the milking barn as they eat. And so this is very scale limiting. The bigger the herd is, the more pasture gets eaten around the milking barn. So for a long time, organic family farmers were growing. And it wasn't until farmers started to realize that the USDA was not enforcing their standards anymore. They weren't getting those. See, the paperwork says that the farmers were getting the cows out to pasture, but the reality was that they weren't going out to pasture. And the same consolidation that happened in the chemical farming is now happening in organic, and we are losing family farms, especially in organic dairy across the country. So I met my co-director, Dave Chapman, there on your right, and he's there with Senator Leahy, who wrote the organic standards back in 1990. And we were part of a rebel alliance of farmers that at the time, before it was the Real Organic Project, was called Keep the Soil in Organic. There I am protesting with a bunch of farmers. This is where I got to meet a lot of the people in the room. These were at the national organic meetings. And we were protesting the certification of hydroponic at the time, which had never been allowed according to the standards, but the NOP was doing it anyway. And I feel like I need to define what hydroponic is, because if you write a lot of the hydroponic companies, they say, we don't grow hydroponically. And they don't tell you the details are, well, all of our fertility comes from liquid fertilizer, but we don't call it hydroponic because we're growing in containers. So they're just outright lying to our face. Why are they lying to us? This is what this looks like. And here's, a direct quote from their customer care service. So I think they're lying because the organic community and the law actually knows that organic farming is and Elliot taught me this, is a simple definition for organic farming is adding organic matter to the soil. And you can't do that in a container when all the feed, all the fertilizer is coming in liquid form. But I think they lie because they know it's against the law. So here is the standing recommendation from the National Organic Standards Board that hydroponics is not allowed. But according to the USDA and according to Driscoll's and Wholesome Harvest and all the companies that do this, they're container growers. I think they're also lying because they know that eaters don't want hydroponic food. I think a lot of us are getting smart, and we know that there's better taste and nutrition if it comes from the health of the soil. If it's sold, they would put it on the label, for sure. So we are in a situation now in the US where there are growers in Holland that are shipping organic certified peppers that are hydroponic to the US, but if they were to sell them in their own country or anywhere in Europe or anywhere else in the world, they would be conventional peppers. We all know in this room that the organic mantra is healthy soils lead to healthy plants, lead to healthy humans, and a healthy planet. And so this is who we are. This is the dairy in my own state of Colorado that's getting certified as organic with 10,000 cows. I have a lot to say about this because they're draining aquifers in order to irrigate pastures that they're then just haying and bringing to the cows in confinement. This is what's driving out the family farming in our country. This is what organic dairy should look like. You'll see it today. This is what real organic poultry looks like. We're moving the poultry because their manure is actually fertilizing the pasture, and if we leave them there, that will become bare dirt. And so the Real Organic Standards require that there's pasture, which basically requires that the poultry are moved, because if they're not moved, you're going to lose what's green. And so this basically doesn't exist anymore, because this is what's getting certified as organic. This is a 2-story confinement barn, and the outdoor access that's required by law for poultry is a tiny cement porch off of these buildings. You know that these chickens aren't getting out because it's a 2-story building. And so this is still, even though we're working on policy reform, this is still getting certified as organic. And look what it's called, Green Meadows. So they know what you want to eat, but it's not honest. We were there protesting other things besides hydroponics. We were protesting fraudulent grain that was both domestic and imported. And I don't want to come across as everything in organic is bad. Everything in my cupboard is organic. And we need a way to be able to put people in jail when they cheat. And that's what organic gives us. But we need enforcement to happen. So this was 6 years ago. We added up either the fraud that was real fraud or just the lack of enforcement, which I believe is also fraud. And organic is a $60 billion industry. And 6 years ago, we added up to be about $6.5 billion. So a tenth of what's certified organic should not be certified at all. And that is having a real impact on the family farmers, the smaller scale farmers that are trying to compete with this. And so I know things haven't gotten any better, especially when it comes to hydroponic. The industry has really grown. People are seeing a lot of money they can get certified organic simply by switching the fertilizer solution that they use. So there's a real influx to put tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, greens, herbs, all out of business. The Washington Post covered all of these issues in a series, excellent investigative journalism, a series of reports that came out in 2017. And nothing's changed. And everybody in this room knows that there is a nutritional difference in the food based on how it was raised. So this is just the eggs that come off of my farm from being exposed. The diet of the chickens is pasture. A third of it can be greens and insects. And it makes a difference. You can see it. They can also put pepper flakes or marigold, in their feed and change the color and fool you. So you really need to know the story of where your food comes from, and that transparency is completely gone right now. So that's what we're trying to bring back. The Washington Post also took a look at that huge Mega Dairy's milk, and they tested for healthy oils. And Aurora Dairy there is the one that looks like all the conventional milk. And the one furthest on your left are the healthy oils from the pasture-raised milk. So not only are the farmers going out of business, but you're getting cheated for healthy food. We're all getting cheated. I don't have a dairy on my farm, right? So I have to figure out how to get healthy milk. So I'm pretty outraged. I was there protesting with a lot of other farmers. And we have some incredible people behind us. This is Vandana Shiva and Shelley Pingree, who we just found out is stuck in Washington, D.C., but it was supposed to be here today talking about the power of the chemical lobby. This is Jack Algier, who runs Stone Barns and gave a fabulous tour yesterday of their farm. And I also want to point out that when we tried to restrict hydroponic growing in these containers, there were 7 NOSB members at the time that really fought to make sure that we would limit the amount of fertility that was allowed in containers. And so even though the law is on our side, 7 out of the 15 NOSB members were on our side. And it would be fewer now because 5 of them are real farmers. And that is becoming more and more rare because the USDA screens the current NOSB members. They tell us, the process, and they get asked, what is your opinion on hydroponics? Because they know this is such a controversial issue. So the real farmers know what organic is. This is Jim Riddle testifying, and this was so fun to be at these organic meetings because for the first time, farmers were at these meetings. And normally it's just input suppliers, either input it into your food or inputs for the fertilizers and pesticides that can be allowed in organic. But soil got the farmers there, so these were really fun meetings. And I want to read this Seth Godin quote. He said, "A project begins with a protest that ends with, 'We'll be back tomorrow, and we're bringing our friends.'" And that's what the Real Organic Project is. So here is the original 15-member standards board that wrote the add-on standards to what now defines a Real Organic Project certified product. And here we are. These are all farmers. Maybe there's Alan Lewis is right there and works for Natural Grocers through the supply chain. So a couple other, but 11 of us were farmers, and that's the goal. And this is Ariel Edwards, and Avril worked on my farm. She's on the right. And so we have this incredible team of young inspectors that's visiting the 1,100 farms that are now certified to these really high standards. One of the questions last night was, obviously, this should be everywhere. You guys are amazing. When is this going to explode? And I said, I don't know how quickly it's going to grow because the standards are set so high so that the whole farm has to be certified organic. So we already lose a lot of people that would like to be part of this movement, but we say, come back, you're part of us, but figure out how to get your whole farm certified organic because there's confusion under the same labels, and fraud is more likely to come in if you're not a whole farm certified organic. And most people, once they start farming organically, they believe in it, and they don't want to farm that way anymore, and they know it works. So come back to us when you've certified your whole farm. And because those standards are set so high, it's going to take us a while to make it to the shelves. And our goal isn't to make it to the shelves. Our goal is to have a really high integrity label that people can believe in. So there are farms all across the country, 1,100 of us, and this is the end of our 6th year. And we have a partnership with Naturland in Europe. So right when I started, I had the opportunity to go to Europe and study what an add-on label was. And it was funny because they thought we were so crazy for not doing this here. The big difference in Europe and why the standards are so high there, why organic has so much meaning, they've pledged to be, by 2030, to be 30% organic, or it's 25% organic, and then a 50% reduction of chemical use overall. And in this country, we're just at 1% of the land. And the USDA is against this policy in Europe. And so I went over there to say, what is going on? Why is it working so well here? And it's just a mess over in the US. And they said, because we kept our farmer-led standards. So we actually have add-on labels to the EU Organic, these regional labels that are defined by the farmers. Why didn't you guys do that? All of our regional labels just started enforcing the USDA standard, and we were told you can't go beyond that. So we are bringing this add-on concept to the US. Unfortunately, we're 20 or 40 years behind. Naturalind's 40 years old behind them, so it's going to take a while to build this with integrity here. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't a high-quality picture, but I just want to run through, in the last couple minutes here, some pictures of what our farmers are doing. So you can kind of see who we are, and we're all across the country. One of the points I want to make when I do this is that our label is free to farmers. And we already carry the burden of having to prove that we don't use chemicals and paying for that inspection, when clearly we're going to live in a world someday where when you buy a pesticide, you are then registered to get an inspection to use it properly. It should be the other way around. There should be an ingredients label on the back of every package with all the pesticides that were used, instead of us having to pay to prove that we don't use any. How backwards is that? So we put on a lot of educational things like this. We have an amazing podcast. We write a letter every week that is forwarded by all of our followers. And so please do that. Read the letter and then forward it, because that's how this grows. And I wanted to stop on this slide because in spite of the fact that the USDA is telling all of the inspectors that you must certify these CAFO cement porches and you must certify hydroponics, there is a group of certifiers that are refusing to do that. And so we are part of this group that is publicly saying, we're together in this. We are not going to follow the USDA, and they are putting themselves at great risk by doing this. And they're also losing money. I mean, it's against their best interest, because you get money to certify according to how much these operations make. And these operations are huge. You saw the double-story barns, right? So when they say no, they're not getting that check, which is based on the gross amount that company's making. So they're going against their own self-interest in order to follow the law. Here's the label in the marketplace out in the wild. We have a text thread that's with all our inspectors. When we see the label out in the wild, we text each other, and it is hitting the store shelves. The last story I want to tell, because I see that my time's up, is what Michael Pollan said. And he said, I think that this battle against hydroponics came 5 years too early. People had no idea what was wrong with it. They didn't see the connection between soil health and climate. So I'm sorry, you guys, but you're 5 years too early. And I told that story to Dave. Actually, maybe Michael Pollan told it to you, and we talk every day for a couple hours. And he said, no, we were 20 years too late. We're going to have to do a lot of makeup here for not keeping the farmers involved in the standards. But I just wanted to point out that I think that is always the case, that the farmers, the organic farmers, see things first. And you are now part, by following the work of all of these farmers across the country, of seeing things first, seeing that no-till with chemical use is not climate smart, right? That's not a popular thing to go out and say, hey, all you no-till farmers, tillage is okay, right? If it's done smart, if it's done so that you're growing your own fertility on the farm, if it's done to incorporate some organic matter. Everybody here is trying to figure this out, and it's not popular to go out there and say these things that we see because we're farming the land and we know what works. But it's the right thing. And I think these conversations are hard, and I'm going to challenge you to have them. Go into your stores and say, and Elliot Coleman actually goes in with a label and puts hydroponic on all the stuff that he thinks is hydroponic. So maybe that'll give you some courage. But have these tough conversations and read the letters so that you can hear what the farmers are seeing and be part of this soil health conversation, because it's not an easy one to have, and the education that you need. It's going to take a long time. Our podcasts and our virtual symposia that we have, I listen to these over and over and over again, and I keep learning. These are great minds coming together. So challenge yourself to get educated. Challenge yourself to have these conversations with people don't know and meet them where they're at. And we'll see if we can make this thing explode before, this is the work of generations, I do believe, but before we all kind of lose hope, because it's hard work, right? We know this is the right thing. And I do want to see the label on all the shelves, but just know that this is going to take time if we have integrity. I know that we are on the right path, so join that path.
Wow, Lindley Dixon with the Real Organic Project. 1,100 farms certified to the Real Organic Project standard now. That is amazing. So there is no excuse for us. We need to go out and find our local Real Organic Project farms. I know mine in my area, Nick's Organic Farm in Maryland. So find yours. Go to the website, Real Organic Project, and find their farm map. Find your Real Organic Project certified farms in your area. And the other thing I loved about Lindley's talk, she said Elliot Coleman goes into grocery stores and labels the organic produce that he knows is hydroponically grown. We can all do it to Driscoll berries. Those are hydroponically grown. And so that's a good start. Maybe Organic Consumers Association can work with with the Real Organic Project to find a bigger list of these hydroponic fake organic products for you, so that we can have this mass movement of going into the grocery stores and educating people about what's happening in organic. So very exciting, so inspired by everything that Lindley had to say. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alexis Badenmayer with Organic Consumers Association. My coworker, Corey Melby, is behind the scenes producing this for us. This is the North American segment of Regeneration International's People's Food Summit. This is a 24-hour broadcast. So it started around midnight my time in the Pacific. And so if you're just tuning in now, you've already missed a lot, but you can catch up. So you're either watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Watch as long as you can with us live. And then when it's done, know that the whole recording of the entire round the globe 24-hour broadcast. So wherever you're at, your local organic farmers, but learn what's happening around the world. It's very exciting. We've done this. This is our third year doing the People's Food Summit for World Food Day. So as I've mentioned, Organic Consumers Association is partnering with the Real Organic Project this year. Real Organic Project just had its conference this Saturday at Churchtown Dairy in New York. So we're bringing you just a few segments from that day-long conference. And if you want to watch the rest, you can go to social media channels for Organic Consumers Association or for Real Organic Project. Get to know Real Organic Project if you don't already, and you can watch the entire broadcast, because we're bringing you about half of what happened at Saturday's conference. So I'm very excited to introduce the next segment from the Real Organic Project conference. The next speaker is Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin of Tree Range Farms. And I love what he does because it's so scalable. Scalable, I guess, is just a corporate buzzword. But what I'm thinking is that certainly it makes a great business model for large scale, market farmers and up. But it's also a great way for us to farm in extremely small spaces. So if you have enough space for a little teeny chicken coop, a little bit of an area for your for just a few chickens to graze, why not plant some fruit trees or nut trees to have your chickens graze under? Um, the Organic Consumers Association, we have a Mexican affiliate, Via Organica. If you saw our little intro video for the People's Food Summit, you saw the beautiful big agave plants. At Via Organica, there's a really wonderful agroforestry project going on now, starting with the plants that can grow in a nearly desertified environment, the agave and the mesquite, and then adding in to make a really truly regenerative organic agroforestry system with multiple layers. But we also do the traditional milpa system at Via Organica, the corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters. And so we've been trialing Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin's tree range farming practices in Mexico with the three sisters. And so you've got the chickens that roost overnight, and then in the morning you open up their cages and bring them into, or not cages, but their barn, and bring them into the pasture. And so really close to the barn is also close to the feed, and that's basically where the chickens want to be most. And so we've got this big 2-acre plot of corn, beans, and squash. And right around the corn that's right by the feed, right by the barn, there's not much undergrowth, right? So there's still the squash growing, but the chickens are always pecking and scratching. And you would think that with that kind of impact on the soil underneath the corn plant, that the corn there wouldn't be that high, but it's exactly the opposite, because they're adding organic matter constantly. So even if they're eating all the greens, all the little weeds, even if they're eating up all the bugs and scratching a lot underneath the growing plants, they're not damaging the plants at all. They're helping with their fertilizer. And so at our big field at Via Organica, the corn is highest near the barn, and the corn that's all the way in the corner of this little 2-acre plot is the shorter corn, because it doesn't get as much of the chicken fertilizer. So Rehi is going to explain how this works in his systems that he uses in Minnesota. So this could be done on a very little, tiny, itty bitty yard in a suburban area or in an urban area. If you're allowed to have chickens in your city, you might be able to get a community gardening plot and do this in a very, very small space, as long as you can protect your chickens at night from predators. So this just has so much potential. I recently visited a farm near me in Maryland, Honey's Harvest Farm, and they have amazing permaculture. And I learned about I didn't know that I would find plants that I'd never heard of, but one that I really loved was the autumn olive. It has tiny little berries that are like grapes. They're either a reddish color or a greenish color, and they're absolutely delicious, like really as sweet as grapes. And I was just there, so it's October and they're fruiting, and the tree is completely covered. And obviously the birds can eat as much as they want. Any other critters can eat as much as they want, but these trees were they're like bushes / trees, but pretty much growing within range of the human hand. Just a great plant. And so thinking about my own yard and what I'd like to do with permaculture, incorporating chickens, like there are so many great plants to use to work into the system. So Rehi's system works for everything from, your regular vegetable farming to, maybe you want to grow, maybe you've got a big yard and you want to grow chestnuts, get into the really big nut trees. But it has so much potential. So I think everybody who's listening will have some interest in replicating what Rehi is doing. I've talked a bunch, so I should just let Corey roll the clip of Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin at the Real Organic Project Conference.
Our next speaker is Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin, and he's going to talk to us about tree range farms. So listen carefully there. There's a T, tree range farms. And it's actually a cooperative of farmers that are grazing chickens underneath trees. Paul Hawken is one of the advisors to the Real Organic Project, and when he wrote Drawdown, he said silvopasture, which is running animals underneath trees, is I think it was number 4. It was in the top 10 of things that we must do in order to fix the climate crisis. So Ray?
Buenos dias. I'll be representing Tree Range Farms, which is the go-to-market strategy of an ecosystem of businesses where we have literally built a supply chain from grain, from aggregation of grain to production of poultry, to the processing of poultry, to the branding, distribution, and everything. For us, the whole idea of regeneration really ends with or is fully inclusive of the land, but it starts with who owns, who controls, and who gets to make the decisions about what happens on the land. That's where regeneration starts. And that's what we lost. We lost the ownership, control, and governance of the system, and that's why we are now being really everything, almost you turn around and everything is fake. There is very few things that are real, and I'm so happy to be here with the real people, with the real food, with the real, what I say, insurgents in this intellectual battle against the fake stuff that is invaded us and is starting to colonize all the way to our minds. So that's why I'm here. That's why I am grateful to be here as well, because you are the real people, and that really means a lot to me. I'm a Guatemalan. I was 4 years old when the war started, the Civil War. I had been here 4 years before it ended, just to give you an idea of the kind of this whole thing about fighting systems. I really don't like that. The fighting thing is, I'd rather be working on building the stuff we want and coming together like this and not giving an inch. That really is how we're going to get there. And so we need a real regenerative movement. We need a real organic movement. We need a real food movement, like a real dairy barn, national movement. I mean, we need everything real again. Let's make America real again. So it's critical to understand that regenerative agriculture, for a lot of us, it started by understanding our ancestral roots. My great-grandfather and my great-grandmother were talking about regenerating the landscape where we farmed. They learned that from many generations before that. All of the elders that I have been lucky to be educated by, different from the schools which domesticate you, our elders educated us. And so that's another play of words that we got to get straight. And I am learning so much about words from because she's like, you are the word master. I really like that. Nobody gets through with the wrong word. That's good. So anyway, but regenerative to us is really a way of thinking. It's a way of being, of relating, of working, of knowing, and a way of relating especially to the living systems of the planet. That's what regenerative is about. We kind of tend to reduce things into these spaces so we can manipulate them, and that's what we call mental colonization, and we shouldn't do that. So let's keep that in mind as we think about what we're doing here, how we are taking this issue of collective ownership and control, governance, and all those whole systems thinking as the centerpiece of how we build real regenerative, the next real regenerative movement alongside the real organic and all these other things that we have to do, right? So for us, it's critical to understand this. The whole thing of farming has very little to do with production of anything. We are simply stewards of processes of transformation of energy, which through the biophysics and the chemistry of the planet that evolved over billions of years, energy goes from non-edible to us to edible to us, whether it's milk, whether it's eggs, whether it's a lettuce. It was first CO2 and hydrogen and all of that. And through those processes, it became what we harvest. But we are harvesting what? Energy, not a product. Product is the word of the extractive colonizing system that seeks to maximize whatever comes out of the land. We don't do that in regenerative thinking. We harvest the energy, and because of that, we have to optimize where that energy is transformed. There's 3 places on the planet where that is happening. Photosynthesis, the most important part, because that's where it all begins. The participation of animals, because animals are the most effective transformers of the outputs of photosynthesis. You take a hay bale and you put it out there in a compost pile, and it'll take a year before it's soil. You take that bale and put it into a cow, and 48 hours later it's being pooped and peed, and then another 48 hours later it's starting to become nutrients for everything that wants to do photosynthesis again, and that's how brilliant the process and magnificent the design is, and that is what allows for the energy flows to be more than the energy that we harvest, and that is what we call the regenerative factor, is energy. It's not no-till, it's not agricultural practices, it's a factor that is scientifically verifiable. And so that's how the animals, at the end of the day, and the soil, on the bottom, close that loop, 3 of the places where energy is transformed on a planetary basis. So for us, it was important to take the chicken. It's a long story, but just to be, clear, I really speak for the chickens when I say that they are not only a jungle fowl, but also look from their perspective, the world looks very different if you actually start to think real regenerative means looking at the world from the perspective of the organisms you are working and relating and knowing with. So a lettuce sees the world one way, a cow does it a different way, a chicken does it in a different way. That's all we did. Try to get as indigenously connected intellectually with what the chicken sees, and that's where our design, all the ergonomics come from. So in this context, the chicken is part of these 3 spaces where energy is being transformed. And chicken is the livestock that we chose to make a point about how we can do real regenerative. So we came into this space to optimize those biophysics and chemistry. And you all know very well that those factors are governed by the laws of thermodynamics that establishes that energy can only be transformed, it cannot be created or destroyed. And so that's all we are doing. It's the same energy that was here on the planet many billions of years ago, and hopefully we don't ship too much more into space so we can keep some of it. So we see the chicken in the middle of that, where we harvest some of the first energy we harvest is from the perennial crops that, as a jungle fowl, we have to put it under this environment where it evolved over millions of years. And so as we do that, those perennial crops are central to that environment for the poultry to thrive. And I could give you books of how this has resulted in these optimal conditions, not only for the health of the animal, but for the efficiency of the energy transformation process and all of that. So we get to harvest energy over and over as we put this system to work. The first, again, is the fruits and and nuts, mostly, that we are able to harvest out of the upper level of the poultry environment. On the ground, we're sprouting grains at a large scale so that we can start moving away from feed and all of those other inputs that are needed. What is not edible to us immediately is edible to trillions of other creatures, like the manure and the feathers and giblets and all of that, which then we move that energy. We're now moving that into the fields where the grain is being grown. It's literally manure spreading, okay? I'm just making it a little bit fancy so that you guys, some of that energy is going into vegetable production. We have tested 250 different vegetable varieties. One of the things you may want to know is that poultry manure has all of the 13 basic elements that every plant needs to thrive, to be successful, as an expression of its own genetics. And so this is really fascinating because now we can start bringing ancestral medicines and all of that, and it's all because of the chicken. This is what, I figured that we're the other side of the, Francis with the cows, us with the chickens, and we start putting that together, and we can have a real regenerative movement when we get all of the livestock sectors together and start taking over the USDA and all those other departments that are actually, they were taking over already, so why couldn't we take them over again? Why not, right? And I love this, and you know, the Real Organic Standards Board, something like, dang, that was brilliant. And we need to make that now the real standards board, you know what I mean? Rather than the one we have. So that gives you an idea of how we structure this idea of real regenerative. Again, it's about the mindset. It's about how we decolonize our minds so that we can see the other 95% of the potential of the landscape that we don't see through the colonizing lens of extraction and expropriation and all of those urges that have actually led us to where we are. In this case, you take the poultry, it comes a day old. They stay in the barn for 4 weeks because they are too small to be ranging. After 4 weeks, in that time, we have been preparing the landscape outside. In this case, is literally dozens of different native species and forages and all of that. Grain that has been spread right before the chickens are going to start ranging, and then continuing to do that. And when there is no canopy yet, we can build that canopy with sunflowers, corn. In my case, edible corn from which we make tortillas, and it's ancestral. I mean, all of this is part of that process. We don't move the buildings because honestly, we don't have to. All of the energy, and now there's 3 years later of scientific verification of that energy flow, we know that. And then 17 years later, after the first unit was built, everything is flourishing in there. There is no excess nutrients. There is no bare ground. It's all covered. And by the way, the problem is that if we don't have chickens there, it just takes over. It's like so productive now. And so, you know, chickens are happy, we are happy. There is very little labor because chickens are really good laborers themselves. And that makes us, if you want to call it from a colonizer perspective, efficient, right? But not only that, we took that and then said, okay, how many units can we put on a farm so that we can actually balance out the output of manure with the landscape we have available? And then thinking not only of the farm, but if a farmer, for example, comes in like in my condition with no land, and I only have access to a few acres, and I don't have land to put the manure into, because the manure in the barns is being collected and then moved outside of the chicken areas, that's why we built systems of farms instead of single farms. And so now coordinated, we always have more landscape than we have manure for. And that we're going to keep that ratio so that we always keep that balance of energy flows, not on a farm level necessarily, but thinking on the system level. Why? Because regeneration doesn't happen on a farm or because of a product. Regeneration is an ecosystem function. Let's keep that in mind. It's an ecosystem function, not a farm level function. And the farm contributes to it, yes, but we got to coordinate across regions in order to achieve regenerative outcomes. And that's a big difference between the fake stuff, regenerative, you know, the use of the regenerative word out there for the purpose of profit versus the real thing. So I will keep introducing you to the chickens. At 4 weeks, they start being trained to be outdoors. Those are hazelnuts, by the way, native to 2/3 of the continental U.S. Just to give you an idea of the magnificent capacity of this country to do real regenerative poultry. Okay, now, do you see how close those trees are to the barn? And they are lush, and they produce 2.5 times more nuts than the trees outside of that fence, to give you an idea of this balance that we are able to achieve. Now, this is the same flock. This is my wife, Amy, and this is the no morning chores. You put the feet out, you go open the door. And these are the same birds, slow growth, 70 days later, they're about to have their one bad day. Still running and jumping and taking leaps like they did on the first day. It's just... Okay, so then organic matter, right? So we take all of this material, we mix it so that we can get that 40-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. And now we have this larger scale mixing of slow release fertilizers that we can bring into this space where there is no chickens. We don't want chickens running around everywhere. So we got this structured really professionally so that we can build curriculum and processes and verifiable systems, scientific processes to monitor what's going on there and all of that. Scientifically verifiable, economically viable, socially compatible with us because it's socially compatible with a farmer with 1.5 acres. That's the unit of production. It's just, you hit all of the engines. That is what regenerative is about. Getting everything, not just one thing so you can make a buck out there by calling something regenerative. For us, the hazelnuts are central because hazelnuts are native to this ecology. They produce the same amount of biomass as soybeans per acre, need no tilling, need nothing except the chickens, of course. But it's also more nutritious. It's got protein levels similar or above soybeans, for example. It's actually a perfect substitute for soybeans in the Midwest because it's not only native, but it's symbiotic to so many other species that can be supported. We can literally restore the water systems. In fact, our hazelnuts are now clogging all of the drain tile that was on the farm that I bought. I don't even need to drip it because the hazelnuts will clog the heck out of them, and then our water gets to stay on the farm. Well, in the bottom, I did dig a whole bunch of pools so that the drain tile that is draining that water actually still stays on the farm, right? So anyway, just to give you an idea of the kind of work that we have been doing on this, all the biomass is then turned around, mixed with the manure, so we can grow, again, almost every vegetable we have tried, including our garlic, our heritage beans from Guatemala, heritage corn, and so on, with the only input being wood chips, organic matter, poultry manure. And as we scale this, we're also scaling that whole sector, including pollinators. But here's something. This is the land I bought. This is where it is. This is what I started, put a pasture right away because that puts, cover. Then we restored the waterways. Then we planted 8,200 hazelnuts. The idea is the whole farm, the whole 65 acres will look like this. Chicken heaven is what I call it. So as we do this, the businesses around it also start to evolve from the chicken and the egg. Now, no longer talking about a farm, but regions of farms. We can aggregate that production for the poultry processing facility, for example. So went ahead and bought a meat packing facility out of Stacyville, Iowa, and now we're deploying more farms around the system. We are also looking for partners in the native communities with larger waterways so we can take the byproducts from the plant, that energy, move it into the fish population, because cross-species feeding is actually good in nature, right? And so then you take those outproducts, those outputs from those different places, you mix them up with the vegetable leftovers, and you have feed that can go back to the chickens, and so on, feed supplements, and value-added products, transportation, warehousing, technical assistance that we just launched a new fund to capitalize the system, and on it goes. And now what you have is a business ecosystem centered on poultry. That's what we call real regenerative. It's not about no-till or any of that stuff, right? So now we are talking about regions. Now we are talking about taking over the space that we gave up. That's where we are coming from. And so our next big step is ensuring that we start talking about governance. And this is why I love this whole, Real Regenerative Standards Board, because that, to me, represents a governing body that is actually real. And so we need governing bodies like that in every sector. We are building now the Regenerative Poultry Council of America, and the idea would be that then representatives from there could end up being that, these regions feed into the national board, so we can end up, hopefully, eventually, with a real regenerative organic Council of America. And at that point, we truly take over the USDA. That's my dream for governance. And it's so doable, more doable than anybody thought, was to, one, meet the massive Guatemalan army, survive it, and actually not lose to them. At the peak of our insurgency, there were only 10,000 effective rebels and over 980,000 soldiers trying to kill us. And yet, they couldn't win. And this is the message I wanted to leave you with. We are engaged not in a real organic or a real regenerative. We are engaged in an intellectual insurgency. That is the real thing we're in. And these are the tools we'll use to organize and to win. That's what I'm here for.
Wow, I love Rehi's message. It's essentially overgrow the government. You know, we have put our faith in USDA organic. I mean, actually, Organic Consumers Association, and we're not the only ones. There are a few people who spoke at the Real Organic Conference who said that when the idea of having a national organic standard came about at first, a lot of people said no. It's better to have multiple state standards, multiple private standards, and have all of these standards in competition so that consumers have a real choice and so that there's pressure upwards to the highest standard. And everyone who was around, you know, involved in organic at that time, not me, it's before my time, the USDA's National Organic Program law was passed in 1990. And then it took a long time for the regulations to be implemented. So the regulations had to be drafted and implemented through the public comment process, and it took years and years. And so that's when Rose Welch and Ronnie Cummins, and sadly, Ronnie Cummins passed away this year. This is our first World Food Day without him, our first People's Climate Summit without him. But his spirit is definitely with us. And I'll be talking a lot about Ronnie's work because it just comes up all the time. Obviously, it's the work that he set out for us and that we continue. So not to get too distracted, going back to the story. So 1990, the USDA organic law got passed by Congress, and then it had to go through the agency and standards had to be developed. And so these standards were rolled out and it took a long time. And so in the late 1990s, the standards were proposed by the Clinton administration. And that's when Organic Consumers Association, when Ronnie Cummins and Rose Welch founded Organic Consumers Association in the late 1990s to protest the immediate corporate attack. I mean, we didn't even have a standard yet, and the corporations were trying to make it a terrible standard. The corporations tried to put in irradiation, sewage sludge, GMOs. And of course, this was all coming through the Clinton administration. And the person at the Agricultural Marketing Service, the division of USDA in charge of the organic label, his name was Islam Siddiqui. And he went from being the one who tried to come up with the very worst organic rules, he went from there to CropLife, which is the pesticide lobby. He went straight to working for Monsanto, Dow DuPont, Syngenta, Bayer, all the worst agrochemical companies. So it shows who he was really working for all the time. So the campaign that Ronnie and Rose got started when Organic Consumers Association first was founded was successful. Those terrible standards were beat back. We ended up with pretty good standards, and it really has taken a long time since then for the corporations to begin to erode the standard little by little, chipping away at it, allowing synthetics and organic, not a lot of synthetics, but enough that it, keeps the controversy going. And then you've heard from Lindley Dixon about how they allowed soilless growing systems to be certified organic. Who knows how? Like, how could you have all of these artificial liquid fertilizers actually be organic? I don't believe it personally. And then, of course, dairy has been a big contentious spot, as well as chickens and egg production. Lindley showed us pictures of the horrible, gigantic 2-story green meadows, organic eggs. Obviously a factory farm with, maybe they feed the chickens organic feed, maybe not. There's been a lot of fraud from grain coming in from Eastern Europe that's mislabeled and falsely marketed as organic. So many controversies in organic. But the way Rehi was just talking about creating these farming systems that are really accessible. Before he talked, I mentioned that I was like, wow, obviously you could do this right here in my own yard. It doesn't require a lot of land and it's super regenerative. Your chickens, Rehi was pointing out that in his system, some of us are used to the chicken tractor system. That's what Joel Salatin does. He's a farmer near me. He's in Virginia, so I visited his farm, and it's a beautiful system. You have your chicken tractor, you have your pastures, and if you have a big farm and you're going to cycle through, you're going to grow your feed for your chickens, your grain or your wheat for yourself. If you're going to grow grains and then shift that field to pasture for cows and then shift that field to pasture for chickens, it makes a lot of sense to have the chicken tractor system. But if you want a permaculture system, the way that Rehi has designed it is just so clever to have, either grow your vegetables and have the chickens help you weed and till, or you grow fruit and nut trees and have the chickens fertilize those fruit and nut trees for you. And he explained how hyper productive hazelnuts, for instance, which are also, he's in Minnesota, totally different climate than where I am in Maryland, but hazelnuts are still indigenous native species here as they are there. I think he said 2/3 of the US has hazelnuts as an indigenous species. So these are just such clever farming systems. And I think he's right. If we all get involved and we reduce barriers to entry by coming up with farming systems like he has developed that can be homestead scale or even yard scale, but can also be scaled up. I mean, he showed pictures of his farm. He planted 8,000 hazelnut trees or bushes. I don't know what you call a hazelnut. If you can do it on a great big scale, and then his vision is to take these smaller scale farms, maybe they're a few acres, maybe they're larger, but then those get aggregated. And a real breakthrough for tree range farms came when Rehi bought a processing plant. So then he could have an entire region of people doing the tree range model, and all of those folks would have a place to process their chickens. So this is really beautiful. And if that's the way farming is, who needs the USDA organic standard? We need a label like that if we're thinking of a corporate system and a system where we buy exclusively from grocery stores. So obviously I buy from grocery stores and I rely on the USDA label there. I'm sure you do too. But when I can, once a week I go to the farmers market, stock up there. And when I can, I do more than just my weekly visit to the farmers market. I order from the farmers who deliver, and I go out to farms when I can to buy direct. And so that's what we need to get into. We need to go beyond relying on the federal government's USDA organic standard. I mean, it's a good bottom standard, but we can go higher than that. So of course, we're going to have to buy some things from the grocery store. We're going to have to buy some things that are imported. We're going to rely on the USDA label, but we can get a lot more creative than that. So it is just so exciting to be here today on World Food Day, celebrating the People's Food Summit, and to be able to bring you what we've done in collaboration with the Real Organic Project, their wonderful conference that happened just this past weekend in Churchtown, at Churchtown Dairy in New York in the Hudson Valley. So let's continue with that. We've been around the world today, starting around 12 a.m. in the morning, my time. And if you missed earlier sessions, please go back and watch the recordings when the live broadcasts are over. It's an exciting trip around the world to hear from organic, regenerative farmers working on agroecology all around the globe in countries that are hyper-industrialized, in countries where they represent the global standard, which is, these small-scale farmers selling direct to their community. These are the people growing 70% of the world's food. Most places on the planet are not as hyper-industrialized as the United States is. They have continuity in their indigenous farming practices. It's really exciting to see Rehi from Guatemala bringing back these indigenous traditions. In North America, or in the Americas didn't have horses before colonization. They didn't have farm animals. They had grazing animals that were still wild. Obviously, the buffalo is what built the very rich soils of the Midwest that farmers in the United States have availed themselves for so many decades. So there were grazing animals, but not domesticated. But chickens were, did become part of the domesticated farming systems, going back millennia. So Rehi is accessing these indigenous practices of the Americas, and he's built his farming system around hazelnuts because that's an indigenous plant and is so prolific and has such a wide variety over a range of climates in North America. So exciting to see these indigenous practices getting revived and reincorporated when there were breaks in these traditions. All right, so the next speaker from the Real Organic Project is Glenn Elzinga, and he's from Alder Spring Ranch in Idaho. He was one of the first farms that sought out the Real Organic Project standard. And that's very interesting because he wasn't somebody who had to compete against the worst problems in organic, which were the soilless growing systems. So if you were a tomato farmer or a berry farmer, you found yourself in competition with these soilless growing systems. If you were producing poultry, you saw yourself in competition with the factory farmed organic eggs and chicken. If you were in dairy, horrible competition and horrible situations where you'd get an organic contract in the Northeast, but it would be gone to somebody producing organic dairy on poor land in Utah, just a factory farm dairy with organic feed instead of pasture. These are the things that farmers have seen themselves in competition with. But Glenn's situation is much different because he's grazing beef cattle on 40,000 acres, I believe, of public lands, of rangelands in Idaho. So I guess his competition, sadly, it's from overseas. A lot of the grass-fed beef in the U.S. market is coming from New Zealand and other places overseas, and it might be legitimate grass-fed beef, but it's not raised in the U.S. So I guess that's maybe one of the reasons why he chose to get in on the Real Organic Project standard. It is, as far as I know, just a U.S. certification. So this is how to find your local farmers where you live. You can go to the Real Organic Project website. You can find on their map of the 1,100 certified farms in the U.S., you can find the ones that are near you. So this is really fun. Let's go on to Glenn's talk. Corey, roll the tape.
Our next speaker is Glenn Elzinga of Alder Spring Ranch, who is a hero out west. It's incredible to get him over on the East Coast. But he's a hero because he runs cattle on public land. And out west, most of the land gets completely destroyed when that happens. The cattle just hang out in the riparian areas and they get rid of all of the trees and everything that's around there. So Glenn and his family have figured out a way to actually heal the land by running cattle on it. So everybody's going to learn so much from him.
How are we doing? Thanks a lot, Abby, for hosting. This is actually very distracting. I have a log building hobby. So I look at all the mortise and tenon stuff, and I'm thrilled to see it. And Dave and Lindley, thanks so much for putting this together. I wouldn't be here today except for a phone call, and I don't know what it was, Dave. I don't recall like circumstance. I would never do well in a courtroom unless if it was visual, very visual type person. And so, Dave, I called you, what was it, 4 years ago? And you wrote something on a blog post or something that kind of pulled the trigger for me, and it was relevant to the scale of production. You know, we all kind of agree that, you know, this dairy that Lindley shows, it's inappropriate for organic, it's inappropriate for real organic for sure. And it's because consumers are led to believe something completely different than the chicken houses she showed us and that mega dairy. And so there was a lot of these questions about scale being raised in real organic. And so the thing about it was that, I don't know what the number was, Dave. It was maybe 8,000 acres was going to be the cap or something like that of organic production. And that was it. I just picked up the phone and said, I got to talk to you. And surprisingly, he picked up, you know, no trace on the number. And he said, what's up? And I said, well, I'm an organic producer in Idaho, and I've been following the Real Organic Project. Absolutely 100% love and agree with what you're doing. But I have this thing. And he said, what's the thing? I said, it's our family ranch. I have 7 daughters. He said, he didn't say, but I was wondering if he was going to say that was a scale limitation. But it wasn't. And I said, we run on 50,000 acres. And it's 50,000 acres of certified organic ground. And I wasn't watching him. I was wondering if he's going to drop the phone, but he kind of took it in stride. And anyway, that led to our long relationship, and now I finally get to meet him in person. But, you know, it just really begged the question of what is appropriate scale about organic? And what I would submit to you is that it maybe has more to do with not so much numbers, and I think I talked to Dave about this, but it's about the heart of the matter. And it's about having a passion and a belief system that says organic should be something that emulates nature. You know, Reggie's emulating nature with his model, and we're emulating nature, and that's really what I think real organic is about. Even though at 50,000 acres 10 years ago when I did the math, I looked at what was in organic production in the U.S. We had more than 1% of organic production on our ranch. By acres. Not by money, not by cattle numbers or anything like that. Which slide am I looking at? I'm looking at slide 2, right? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, that's a picture of the scale of production. Everything you see in a picture is certified organic. Everything, all the way to the horizon, all the way from the left to the right. That's me on horseback. I'm actually a line scout in front of my crew, wondering where we're going to take the cattle next. It's a very diverse and beautiful system. There's 55 miles of trout stream down in those incisions in the land. And it's got beaver swamps, willow swamps like this in it. And then it's got all kinds of subalpine timber and even alpine tundra at nearly 10,000 feet. So it's a very, very diverse ecosystem, but it wasn't always this beautiful. We occupy this land too, as part of that ecosystem. But before we started doing that, Lindley kind of nailed it. A lot of it looked like this. This is a riparian area, a creek in Little Hat Creek, kind of running through the main part of our ranch, and main part of that rangeland. And you can see it's severely downcut, and this is all cattle. This is in 1999. We took the ranch over in 2005. It looked like this when we got the place. And you know, I'd ride horseback through here. Very remote country. There's no roads up here. So it's all horseback or on foot. And we just saw these downcuts, and we saw tons of erosion happening. And there was no fish. There was no beavers. There's hardly any willows or any other vegetation. And Carol and I are ecologists. She's a PhD plant ecologist, and I was a forest ecologist when we got into this ranching thing. A lot of our friends said, why are you going to join him? We wanted to join him because we thought there was a way to have hope. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Sometimes hope and ideas come from very strange places. And we were running these cattle up on this range. We had about 300 head up there, 300 pairs, that is, mama calves. So it's cow and calf, so a total of 600 head. And me and the kids were riding horseback all the time, trying to keep these cattle out of creeks. It's like, get out of here, girls. Move up on the hill. And then, of course, they'd come back, and we thought, this isn't working. And then these wolves came in. There was kind of low-level wolf bordering in our territory, and there was some predation going on. But in 2013, we lost $40,000 worth. We were a nickel and dime existence. We were hand to mouth, and that was a tipping point for us that said, maybe we need to quit. Maybe we need to hang this deal up because we'd lost all hope. But the problem is this. We're Frisians, Dutch people, and Dutch people are those people that build dikes to keep the ocean out, okay? So there's this severely stubborn streak in us, and we're like, no, we can figure this out. So we started looking through all kinds of things. We wanted to find out what functionality looked like before we showed up on a great Western landscape, okay? And so we started looking at bison. We went to Yellowstone all the time. It's very close. And just watched and observed bison. We, looked at pictures of Wood Buffalo National Park up in Canada. That's where this is taken. And the thing we noticed was that bison were always traveling around in these bunches. And the way cattle have been managed for 150 years on the great Western landscape, which is like 1/4 of this country is public lands grazing or dry land grazing, was extensive use, continuous use of cattle everywhere, 1 cattle per square 10 miles. And the bison never did it that way. And we decided, what if we could do that? What if we just started emulating those bison with our cattle? And so we did. And that's what it looked like. We put a few kids on horseback around the perimeter herd. It took a lot to learn how to move those cattle and keep their heads down instead of up. That was a lot. That was an incredible amount of work to get that into both the human and the cow. That when their heads are down, we're making money. When their heads are up, we're losing money. That's what it looks like. At the end of that little arrow is the herd. There's 3 girls on horseback and about 400 head of cattle in that blob. Okay, and I'm on top of the range, taking this picture across the entire landscape. That's what the landscape looks like. We call it in-herding, intensive, intentional herding across the landscape. First objective, we decided, Carol and I, we're thinking about this whole thing wrong. We need to start the foundation of ecological function before we thought about profitability. So he said, let's figure out ecological function first, because that's what worked. It's like Francis was talking about, in grazing systems on his place, when we emulated nature, profitability followed through, just like what Reggie was talking about. We have doubled our carrying capacity on our valley ranch, because our soil organic matter is now 7.75 instead of 2.45, which it started with. And we thought, we could probably do that on these ranges. So first thing was end riparian use, and it was easy in principle. Put people on horseback between them and the 2 G's, which are green and gravity, which cattle throughout the West follow and cause this problem. If you guys were all congressionals, I think I could convince you in about maybe 2 hours that cattle on public land is a bad idea. But when you walked out, would you vote to get cattle off public lands? Probably not. And the reason is it'd be political suicide. And it's because the agricultural lobby is very strong. That's great difficulty in terms of regenerative and real organic. And it's why these kind of meetings are so important, because they really got to start from us, from our heart. It's the heart of the issue that's going to convince people, and get a groundswell support from the ground up, and then build in some like Reggie was talking about at the end, because we'll have enough momentum. So here's the before and afters. That's that same picture, remember? This is it last year. It's the how, not the cow. Yep. Here's another one. Look at this one. This is one of my favorites, even though you can't. These are metal T-posts. They're still there. We find them and retake the photo point, so we know exactly where we are. Here's the same one. Impenetrable brush, okay? And it's just because we moved these cattle off the range. Objective number one with beavers was critical because we restored those riparian areas, and look what happened. The year we began in-herding, we have an exponential beaver growth curve. Now we have almost 100 head of beavers on that range where we had none. And here's the crazy thing about beavers, guys. I'll talk to you in a few slides. Remind me to come back to that because, well, I'll see the slide. But anyway, number two was take care of the uplands. Stop the continuous grazing, okay? And that meant average 4-year return period. And it also meant decreasing the duration of grazing dramatically. Okay, here's a picture I took. Linnea's on horseback in the upper right of the photograph there. You can kind of see her. She's bringing 450 head in to this timber stand at about 9,000 or 8,000 foot elevation. And these cattle are coming through. I'm going to take a picture when they enter the stand, and I take a picture when they leave. 2.5 minutes. Average of 4 minutes time grazing on an average of 4 years of time rest. This year, most of the stuff we graze hadn't been grazed in 12 years. We're on it for 3 minutes. So that's why it's now home on the range. And here's the key part. Instead of acting on an ecosystem, we became part of it. That's the vision that changed for us. Now, you guys are all experts about how this is done. So that means you're ready for the 500-mile journey. You don't have to walk it. You can be on horseback with me. But this is what it looks like. This is this last May. These are all our employees and interns. We have many. We have 20 different people that come to help us. We have about 45 head of horses. And we start out from the ranch with the cattle and begin the long 500-mile journey. It really is 500 miles that they walk over the summer. Here's the first night, grazing in the low country of the Sand River Mountains. Here's coming dark into the first camp. We herd them down into a camp. We sleep with them every night. We live with them because otherwise we'll have wolf predation, remember? The wolves actually come into our camp while we're gone during the day. We'll have paw-sized footprints around our tents and in our cook shacks. They'll watch us from hills above us. They'll howl at night. But we now have a different situation. We have a relationship with them. This is the beaver shot. Okay, way down there in that canyon bottom was the first time I heard a beaver slap its tail. I ran down there, crawled up, and sure enough, here's this little rodent. They're rodents, guys, swimming across this riparian area. And that was the beginning of the exponential curve. And Lindley was out one day, and I said, they were raining beavers. It was like it was raining beavers. And here's why. Okay, look at that mountain, that sagebrush mountain. The beavers had to cross this. It was the nearest habitat to our low elevation riparian area. They had to cross the mountain, guys. Beavers go 6 miles an hour. Okay? Wolves go 37. Black bears go 35. They're walking cream puffs. So it is at great risk that they come and live with us. And it blows me away. It's humbling. It really is. It's just so beautiful, and it's humbling. Very steep country. We get up into high elevation timber very quickly. Okay, low elevation Douglas fir, lodgepole pine, and a higher. This is one of my daughters. She's looking down in the canyon bottom because she's like, I really don't want them to go down there. That's one of my daughters. They do a lot of that when they're riding. They smile. They actually love what they do. These are 18-hour days, guys. They're 18 hours a day in a saddle. They pull their gear, take care of their horse, go in a cook shack. It's dark, cook dinner. It's midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. They fall asleep, wake up when the sun comes up, and they do it all over again. These cattle are actually waiting for them in the morning. They're laying down right next to their tents. They get on horseback, walk over to the gate. It's like a choir. It's like somebody said, all rise. Because all of a sudden, the cattle all stand up. They know it's time. And they have trusted it to my kids, my interns, to guide them to that day's grass. And the grass, that's the old boy. It's mostly young people. We have tried old people like me, 50 years and older, and they fall apart categorically in 2 or 3 days. They just cannot handle it. They just cannot handle it. I guess I'm too dumb. I just keep going. But, it's really all about everybody builds a story. That's my daughter, and that's that paint she's on developed this incredible story over that the people before that had that 3-year-old were going to tip it over. We're going to send it off to, the glue factory or whatever because he wasn't working out. But up here, they become partners. The water, everybody thinks it's about grass, but it's really about water. If you're not drinking out of the 55 miles of creeks, you got to deal with the water, and you got to get it out of those ecosystems. So that's been a thing. If anybody you want to talk to me about it later, it's highly technical, but we've become very efficient at it. And the water has changed this much, guys, and I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. We all drink out of the creeks. The cattle, the horses, us. We don't purify the water. We don't filter it. We don't do anything. We never get sick. It is that clear. When you drink that water, it's like what water was meant to be. It's beautiful. And I can't do that on anybody else's grazing allotment because it's gross. It's fetid. It's got fecal matter floating down it. It's got sedimentation. It's wrong. That's our camp. It's real super low impact. Leave no trace, move out immediately. And this is why we come. There's 2,500 native plants up here, and you might think, oh, that's crazy. My wife's a botanist, okay? She put together a plant list. 2,500, our cattle eat them. We find out the phytochemical richness of those plants and the biodiversity of them gets into our cattle. I've had metabolomic testers test thousands and thousands of beef from all over the world. They said, yours is the only beef we've ever tested whose omega-3 fatty acids exceed that of omega-6s. And it's because of this. I'd like to take credit, but it's not. It's those plants. So remember, you're riding 500 miles. You're supposed to get tired. We have people from all over the world join us. We have 600 intern applicants a year. It's very difficult to sort through them. He came from Scotland. They become so tight relationship-wise because they have each other's backs. It's hard work. But they're lifetime friends when they leave. The cattle are slick. I don't know if you guys use that word out here, but we use it. It's slick. It means there's no aberration on their hides. There's no bugs. There's no flies on them. We use no fly control. We're organic, right? It's because of the phytochemical richness. Dr. Fred Provenza was out there with me, and I said, Fred, why no bugs? And he said, because they're eating their own medicine. They're eating it, and it's coming through their hair. And the flies don't like it. You're letting a cow be a cow. He said, you're letting them make their own nutritional wisdom. It's not a feedlot. You're not feeding them corn. You're feeding them 2,500 plants. Oh, by the way, let me go back. Can I go back? Yeah. That's camp. You can see we're just in the middle of this forested expanse. And we found a little meadow to put those tents so we could camp there. It's just solid wilderness. It's just us and the wolves. Grizzly bears, or we have grizzlies coming near, black bears, but it's just, it gets under your skin. And then finally in September, it's time to end your 500-mile journey. And you pack up the camp, and you stand together for one more group photo. Eat breakfast on the range on the way out. It's a 5-day ride out to get them back. We can see all this from our ranch, but it's 5 days to get up there on foot. Coming downhill now instead of uphill. And we're back home. You can see the relationship there, but it's a lot more than that, guys. They have a relationship that's with the cattle. They have a relationship with their horses. They're brave companions that lived with them up there for the entire summer and poured their heart out. Their dogs they're holding, who've lost weight, by the way, because it's tough. It's tough on a dog. but they have a relationship that's on that landscape. And that land, it's kind of pulsing through their veins now. And they don't want to leave. It's become part of them. And you know, when we partner with nature like that and become part of ecosystems, to me, that's what real organic is. Anyway, thank you.
Wow. I can see why Glenn has 600 people who want to do that for the summer. That is, yeah, I'm just blown away. Wow. Wow. So that's just a whole new level of rotational grazing. What Alan Savory teaches, the holistic planned grazing. So yeah, so Glenn and his wife, a forest ecologist and a PhD plant ecologist, they had the smarts to do this. They had to figure out how, what the land could handle. And the land was depleted by overgrazing, grazing that was continuous and unplanned. So they had to work it out. And man, 4 years of rest for that land to just get 4 minutes of grazing from their cattle. That's rough. But I think that, with time, because they are treating the land right and they are in sync with everything that is happening in the cycles of that land, I think he said that their work became more profitable and they were able to increase their stocking density. It's an amazing, amazing story. I love the part where he talks about being able to drink right out of the creek. I mean, isn't that everybody's dream? Like, can you just imagine, like, you walk out of your door and there's a pristine creek that you can drink right out of? I guess that's why they're intense, right? They're out in the wilderness. So we're not going to see that, anytime soon in our modern lives, to be able to drink from the groundwater, from the surface water, I mean. But that is really amazing. Another thing from his talk that just blew me away, the 2,500 native species that the cattle were grazing, and that was giving the cattle so much nutrition that the beef he produces has more omega-3 than omega-6. I mean, that's amazing. This is the first time I have heard of a beef producer who can claim that. And I guess he is very, very unique. But really cool that he checked that out with Fred Provenza and confirmed that it's the richness of the grazing. Like, if you have 2,500 native plants that your cattle are grazing on, then they're going to get that phytochemical richness. So much so that they don't have insect pests that bother the cattle. I mean, can you imagine seeing a cow that doesn't have flies all over it? We just associate these things. Wow, what an amazing thing that Glenn Azinga from Idaho, Alder Spring Ranch, is doing. One of the 1,100 Real Organic Project certified farmers around the United States. So exciting to see this. Wow, well, I'm just blown away. We're in the first half of our North American session, part of this 24-hour trip around the globe with Regeneration International, the People's Food Summit. And we are coming to our last speaker of this segment. So the North American segment is two 2-hour segments. So when this one is over, you'll have to go back to the homepage of wherever you're watching, if you're on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, and reconnect with our next live broadcast when this one is over. So our next speaker is Ben Dobson. His talk is on the politics of carbon sequestration. Geez, I've already watched this because this broadcast happened first on Saturday, the Real Organic Conference at Churchtown Dairy in New York. So I've watched this, and it is truly humbling. Organic Consumers Association, under the leadership of Ronnie Cummins, started Regeneration International back in 2014. And Ronnie had been leading us in climate work for a very long time at that point. I think that we got involved right when we heard that from the Rodale Institute. Tim LaSalle, who was the director of the Rodale Institute in about, I want to say 2006. I know it was before 2008 because 2008 was a Farm Bill year. And we brought this information to Congress in our lobbying around the Farm Bill. So it was sometime before 2008 that we learned that Tim LaSalle at the Rodale Institute, which is a research farm for organic agriculture, they had begun to measure their carbon sequestration. And they realized that the carbon sequestration on their organic plots was so intense that if you were to scale this up globally to all of the farmland around the world, it would balance out carbon emissions. Now that is just mind-boggling, but that is the good news that Ronnie Cummins and all of us at Organic Consumers Association, and then in 2014 when we started Regeneration International, that is the good news that we came to share, that soil carbon sequestration on well-managed land, whether we're talking about what Glenn does in Idaho on grazing lands, which requires a lot of rest for that land before it's grazed again, but the cows do add a lot to the regeneration of the land when the land is ready to take that impact. All of these systems, whether it's the intensive vegetable farming that we saw when Lindley Dixon gave her talk, she showed images of her vegetable farm where she's got nice mounds, they're heavily mulched, and at the end of the season, she plows in all of her vegetable plots and lets all of the accumulated organic matter that's left after she's harvested and everything that she's added with her organic compost and manures to that soil, that's all reincorporated at the end of the season. Then she probably uses a cover crop as well, but she's using tillage. It's appropriate for her type of vegetable farming. We're seeing with this Real Organic Project conference a wide range of ways that regenerative, organic, agroecological systems sequester carbon. And really, like when we first started, I have to say, we just thought, Ronnie was so eloquent as a speaker and a writer. And if you haven't read Ronnie's book, Grassroots Rising, about this regenerative agriculture movement, please read that. It's a wonderful book. So much good news in there. We really felt like, oh my gosh, the Rodale Institute just discovered this. Nobody knows yet. Let's just tell the world how amazing regenerative organic agriculture is. And obviously the world knows we need to act on climate. Pretty soon, all of these farmers will be getting paid twice. Once to produce the nutrient-dense food that they produce on their farms, and a second time for the carbon sequestration and all of the along with that, the water holding capacity, the cleanliness of the water, like Glenn telling us on his public ranch lands that he stewards with his animals. The creeks run clear, the water is clean, you can drink direct from the creeks. Like these are the benefits of regenerative agriculture. And we just assumed, okay, all we need to do is to be able to measure it, to prove what we know about these carbon sequestering regenerative organic systems, and then get the policymakers to follow through. But we saw carbon markets being created. We just thought, okay, this is plug and play. It's ready. And that's what Ben Dobson, our next speaker, has been working on now for many years at Hudson Carbon. And his talk will open your eyes. Even though I've lived through the same things that Ben has lived through and I've noticed the same, it still was a little bit sobering, because the fact is that these carbon markets are not being widely opened to regenerative organic farmers. And instead, the US Department of Agriculture is pretending that the industrial systems with the genetically modified crops, the chemical fossil fuel-based fertilizers, the petroleum-based synthetic insecticides and herbicides and then all of the gigantic machinery for farms that are thousands and thousands of acres, when it's all automated, some driverless tractors, that could possibly be a more regenerative system than organic and more worthy of carbon credits. But we live in an upside down world, and that's, when you have the corporations writing the policy, that's the type of policies that you get. So I'll let Ben Dobson tell this important story. You'll learn about his work as a regenerative organic farmer. He even talks about the work that he's doing with our network at Via Organica in Mexico, the work that he and Ronnie Cummins have worked so hard to prove through the techniques that Hudson Carbon has to measure carbon. So you'll hear all about that in Ben Dobson's talk. And I'll meet you afterwards to remind you to join the next live stream. When this one is done, there's another one afterwards. So stay with us here at the People's Climate Summit, and please enjoy this really eye-opening talk from Ben Dobson.
Our first speaker after lunch is Ben Dobson. There are very few people in this world who understand the food system as well as Ben does, and also have spent the number of years farming that Ben has. So he's really a wealth of information. Ben.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lindley, and thank you everyone for coming. Today it's been about 10 years since this building went up, and it's about 8 years since Abby Rockefeller and I started something called Hudson Carbon, which I'm going to talk about a bit in the title of my talk is sort of the politics of carbon farming, which you now hear about from the government, which is now pretty problematic. But I'll first start, I'm originally from this county, from Hillsdale, New York. My parents started what was just the second organic farm here. Hawthorne Valley started the first. I believe there are several folks from Hawthorne Valley. And then my parents made their way from the University of California, Santa Cruz Farm and Garden Project to some land my grandfather bought and started an organic farm where we grew vegetables, and I was trained to say herbs. And we still grow vegetables and the herbs are now legal. So when we have a more structured food system, maybe we'll just do food. Anyhow, from my parents' small family farm, I then went and did a larger scale vegetables, a couple hundred acres where we made prepackaged salads for about 130 supermarkets. And that was a larger scale organic where I felt the real pressure of scale and organic and choosing between your survival and your ideals, which isn't very fun. I later worked in the Caribbean exporting bananas and coffee for a short time, coffee for much longer. And then spent 10 years the last 10 years in this area working with Abby, and for some of that time with a couple of her siblings transitioning land from conventional grain to organic grain and forages. But the primary thread for the past 10 years has been taking land in this home county of mine with great partners and removing chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, and genetically modified crops from them. And in 2015, Abby and I had a lot of discussions about, well, what does organic really mean? And quite literally, we're talking about organic matter in soil, and organic matter contains carbon, usually over around 57%. So when the organic farming movement got started, Sir Albert Howard, J.I. Rodale, many folks were talking about, let's put more organic matter back in the soil, and the organic matter will carry microorganisms, hold water, and help transfer nutrients naturally, and therefore we won't need chemicals or synthetics. So let's not forget where the word organic came from. So when we undertook these organic transitions on this land around here, we undertook to study the changes in soil carbon in those soils to understand if our organic farming, both certified and real organic farming, was working. And I think we found out some things, and we found out a lot of things we still don't know. But one path I didn't expect was to see, there's a real exciting period after we started Hudson Carbon where this word regenerative came up, and all of a sudden companies and politicians were really interested in the words climate and regenerative and farming. And it took us until about 2019 to realize they'd forgot the word organic wasn't being used, but regenerative and climate smart was. So I'm going to kind of walk through the process of watching the last few years of politics, where you hear these words climate smart commodities, where you hear the words regenerative, but you never hear the word organic. And that's the world we're living in now. And we need to start hearing the word organic for its real meaning again in this political discourse, because it's really been hijacked. So when we started Hudson Carbon, we initially started talking to Woods Hole Marine Biological Laboratory to help us with scientific methodologies and how to best measure soil carbon and soil cores. And then now I know it's a bit flawed, but we laid out a experimental design across 2,500 acres in different parts of our farming system on different parts of soil. And we set out to detect change in soil carbon at different depths in the soil vis-a-vis different practices occurring in those locations. And then we layered on the use of eddy flux towers, which read, there's one across the way, that every 30 minutes detects the localized carbon dioxide for the field that it's in. So it weeds out the noise of the general atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is over 400 parts per million now. And some days you get a reading where it's 220 parts per million. It means the pasture is really sucking in some carbon. When we tilled up that field, it was up around 700. So we watch in a few sites every 30 minutes the carbon dioxide level, and over there methane as well. And out back on the compost piles, you'll see all these boxes. And those are taking readings of nitrous oxide, methane, and carbon dioxide throughout the day and night. And that's because we've learned that to really support real organic farming, we need to take real measurements of these gases and these critical elements, so that we have something we can compare to the conventional system. Okay, so now let's get into the politics part, where we farm organically in a real way, and we seek to monitor what we do here. But so we started in 2015, and it was a really exciting time. Sort of immediately we set out with setting out methods to measure, and the 2016 Paris Climate Accord was coming up. So we were planning with a lot of collaborators what to do with Regeneration International and the late Ronnie Cummins, whose wife Rose is here today. We did a lot of planning. And we communicated with many groups this was the first real opportunity on a global stage to say that farming and soils are part of this climate thing we're talking about. Because sort of in the public's mind and politicians' mind, carbon is a word that's been made bad. And the truth is, carbon's sort of the underpinning of our life system. So we need to talk about the cycle of carbon, and that we may have too much in one place and not enough in the other right now. And this conference was the opportunity to get that out there. So we participated in the 4 per 1 million initiative and several other initiatives. And after the conference, we felt, oh, we've really made some progress, because coming out of Paris, it felt that soil was given its rightful place within the climate discussion as a core place where carbon could be stored and protected, and where good management of land could impact maybe more carbon getting into the soil, or more carbon that we already have in the soil being protected. But by the next year, we saw something, also at the Paris Climate Accords, you had agreements like Corsia, where the airlines said, well, we're never going to be able to stop our emissions, so we need to find a way to offset. We need to be able to buy tons of carbon that's been sequestered by other people, so we can just keep flying, and you can get your first class and everything. And then we started getting a lot of interest from corporations asking, hey, are you guys going to do any of these carbon offsets? And I'll admit, I really got into it for a couple of years. It's like, yeah, we're definitely going to get carbon money for organic farms and make these measurements. And as we increase carbon, we're going to get paid per ton. And as we monetize carbon, the world's going to get better. So that didn't happen. And every time we got close to selling some carbon credits, you'd find out that the buyer was like an oil company or somebody making something out of plastic, and they just needed to offset their bad behavior. So, and Abby kept like, when are we going to get money to farmers? I was like, gee, I don't know. There's just no good money out there, you know? But what really happened also is we had a crisis in science where all these carbon markets got started. So you now have Chevron buys carbon credits. You know, they pump oil all day, and they can buy carbon credits to offset their oil pumping for $8 a ton. Exxon buys carbon credits. Every major airline buys carbon credits. And very rapidly, large tracts of land across the world are in these carbon schemes where, and usually these tracts of land are owned by very large landowners. Delta doesn't want to work with a lot of small landowners. You got to have a big tract of land that the people have already been removed from, and then you can sell some carbon credits. So this kept getting worse and worse. And so we really pivoted at Hudson Carbon to saying, okay, how are they getting away with this? And we've spent the last 4 years understanding methodologically how flawed science has become the underpinning of these models that drive soil carbon estimates and drive forest carbon estimates. And it's now really becoming systematized. The primary solution for sequestering carbon and selling carbon credits in farmland is no-till agriculture. And there's some, pretty cheaply done studies that studied the accrual of carbon in the top 8 inches of soil in no-till systems. And these models are mostly all built off these old studies. The truth is the carbon in those systems is lost in the deeper soils, and you temporarily sort of freeze some dead biomass and increase your soil carbon. And then process-based models are built out of this. And then groups that certify carbon credits use these process-based models to then say that this industrial agricultural system's creating carbon credits for this industrial polluter to buy. So that's how it's shaken out. So what we do at Hudson Carbon now is we're working to really work on new methods so that the studies that underpin these models, so that we can work on some real science that shows these models really don't work. And there are many of us in the movement working towards that. But I'm also going to move a little further into where we really have to watch out, and we often have to watch out when many of us in the organic movement, we tend to be often more liberal or formerly more liberal, and we get a government like the one we have, and we say, oh, they must be doing something better than Trump, right? So the last couple of years, we've been delivered a couple gems. One's called the Climate Smart Commodity Program. And the other is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, where apparently if you print $2 more trillion, you're going to reduce inflation. So let me get into these. The Climate Smart Commodity Grants. $2 billion, it turned into $3 billion, was unlocked by the administration for climate smart agricultural practices. And this is the USDA trying to really work with the idea that good farming practices results in a resilient climate and sequestration of carbon. So the first $66 million went to the Iowa Soybean Association, because soybeans have really proved to sequester carbon in a big way. And then we saw some money go to Corteva, the largest seed company in the world, formerly Dow DuPont, because they've got some real good GMOs that sequester carbon as well. And then I will also say the program did benefit some good folks. Some of them are in the room today, and that was good. But at the end of the day, this movement proved very divisive, where we have a word regenerative being applied to multiple systems. And the impact of this Climate Smart Commodity Grant was really devastating to many of us in the movement. we all, former allies, some of us still are, had to compete with each other for grants. I watched many people who have been organic farmers their whole life ally with corporations who are on the exact opposite side of us, just because they needed the money to survive, or they decided to compromise themselves. And we're in a very fraught time where we're not facing a direct opponent. We're facing an opponent from within who's working much more with co-opting of words, of language, and then using money to create alliances that break former alliances. And we're here today with Real Organic Project because, while I'm a bit snarky, the real truth is that we need to make an alliance between good science, good policy, good food, and health. And in order to do that, I'd say in a way, we need to hold the USDA accountable to standards and to improve standards. We also have to work outside of them until we can get the right people inside. I'm gonna move on to the IRA and then kind of move out of the climate politic topic and just talk a bit about movements around the world that are occurring. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is our so-called, crown jewel of the climate movement. They're at work, they're putting concrete pylons out off Cape Cod for wind towers. Soybean oil is apparently a green fuel, so that amidst a world food crisis and the Ukraine war, we're going to see a major boost in soybean production next year because farmers will all get a tax break and a subsidy for growing soybeans to make green biodiesel. That's the IRA, cooked up by Tom Vilsack for us. That was the ag part. Same thing with ethanol for corn. So at a time where we need less of these commodities, if we're going to do anything climate smart, now that corn and soy are being codified as climate smart, we're down the rabbit hole. So we really have to understand who we're working with. The USDA is run by these people, and we're here asking for them to provide us with an organic standard, and we can't. Instead, we have to hold them accountable to what's left of the standard and make them improve, and we have to understand, as Francis pointed out, we have very few insiders anymore. So from the outside in, we're really facing a system that's difficult. So getting back to the politics of climate, it extends internationally as well. We have corn and soy spreading across Brazil at unprecedented rates. And most of this is with American seed companies, many times American ag school graduates, and American companies like Bunge moving the beans out. So when Biden met Lula and did not provide barely any money for Amazon protection, and then a month later it was announced that Bunge and Viterra were joining to be the third largest grain company in the world with ADM and Cargill, it was not really surprising that we didn't help protect the Amazon, because that will result in more efficient cutting of the Amazon and export of beans from it as a leverage point over China. So that's some of our international climate smart work. And then we're also up to some other good work too. In Mexico has determined that they don't want not a GMO grain anymore. They've banned glyphosate and imposed a tariff on US white corn so their own white corn growers can feed their own country human grade grain. Upon this announcement, Tom Vilsack flew to Mexico in November of last year and threatened the Mexican government that they would be taken to trade court if they refused to take genetically modified grain from the US. And in March, the case was referred to trade court, where it now is. Mexico will have to convince the USMCA that GMOs are unsafe for human consumption in order to win. They're very unlikely to win. But I guess my point is that as we're moving into yet another election year in time, I think we fundamentally have to think differently about what we're looking for. Because we're living in a system where if either of the major party wins, we're going to continue to see the same thing in food. And it's critical that we as eaters and we as farmers and we who believe in this movement stay close to those who provide us our food directly and work directly with anyone we have access to who still has a voice in the political system or media to take a stand against this. Because the control and takeover started in this country many years ago, but it's now extended outside of it. And the right to farm and the right to eat what you want is becoming further and further away. And we're all here today because our country allows, basically we have to pay more for good organic food, but for many of us in the world, we don't have a choice. And I think that demanding change at the base level with what we eat and in all aspects of our life will result in change all the way up through issues that may feel unrelated to food. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you all.
Wow, I just love Ben Dobson. Great talk. So now is the time that this segment ends on the live stream, and you have to go back to the homepage at YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook to pick up the next 2-hour live stream. Again, we'll bring you fantastic speakers from the Real Organic Project Conference. Next up, we've got Ariel Edwards, Alan Lewis, Dave Chapman, and more. So stay tuned by jumping onto the next live stream. I'll see you there.